Morning, everybody. About 13 months ago, I stood here and presented my long session budget, a balanced budget that placed value on our state's children and invested in their future. 13 months later, North Carolina still does not have a budget, but the needs remain, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. North Carolina has a lot to be proud of. In many ways, we're the envy of the nation. This past year, we've been ranked the #1 state for business, the #1 state for economic development, the #1 state for workforce development. We're the #1 state where people from other states are moving. We're the #1 state for job growth. We're experiencing this success because of our people, and because as a state, we have invested in them over decades. But we're putting that winning formula at risk. Our state has fallen behind in key metrics for public education, public safety, and health care. Since the General Assembly last enacted a full budget 2.5 years ago, we have added 325,000 new residents to North Carolina, seen 6 to 8% inflation, suffered the worst natural disaster in state history, and experienced a federal government placing unprecedented unfunded mandates on state and local governments. We cannot simply stand still and hope for the best. That's why earlier this month, I announced my critical needs budget to fill the state's most urgent gaps. The budget would fully fund Medicaid, give long overdue raises to teachers, state law enforcement, nurses, and other public servants, as well as shore up key functions that are simply limping along. 3 weeks ago, I announced my third Hurricane Helene budget proposal. We're rebuilding Western North Carolina for the long haul, which requires more federal and state support. So alongside these already existing needs, today I am pleased to recommend my budget for the fiscal year 26-27. This budget ensures that we continue investing in our people, meeting their needs, and keeping North Carolina strong. If we're going to continue to build on our long-term economic success, we must start by investing in our public schools. Our children truly are our future, so investing in them must be our greatest priority. Yet, we are ranked 49th in the country in terms of how much we spend on each student's education. It's pitiful. We rank lower than all of our neighboring states in starting teacher pay. We're 43rd in the country in teacher pay, and we have one child care slot for every 5 families who are looking for one. These are some embarrassing and unacceptable facts. Last week, I met a teacher who moved here from South Carolina in 2000 because we used to pay our teachers better than South Carolina did. North Carolina has failed to keep up, and she's actually thinking about moving back to her home state. South Carolina spends $5,500 more on each school child than we do in North Carolina. That equates to about $8 billion more invested in K-12. Even Mississippi spends $1,366 more per pupil. That equates to about $2 billion more in public funding of education. If you had told me as a young man in this state that South Carolina and Mississippi would invest more than North Carolina does, let alone so much more, I simply would not have believed you. Let us right this wrong. My budget will make starting teacher salaries in North Carolina the highest in the Southeast while significantly raising wages for all teachers, eliminating pay plateaus, and bringing back master's pay. The budget also focuses on student achievement. By expanding Advanced Teaching Roles Initiative, my budget will give our best teachers an opportunity to take on leadership roles, impact more students, and earn more money for it. We also want to extend the gains students are making from the science of reading by expanding the initiative to additional grades. My budget also proposes several investments to enhance student safety and well-being. I call for more funding for school safety grants to keep kids safe at school. We need more support staff like counselors, nurses, social workers. They in the schools can help to improve students' mental health, reduce absenteeism, and strengthen academic performance. My budget will hire more of all of them. We will also fund long overdue repairs at public schools across the state. We will adjust our special education funding formula to better support exceptional students. And we will work to reduce childhood hunger. I am proposing free school breakfast to invest in kids' health, attendance, behavior, and academic success. I'm further proposing that we appropriate recurring state funding to unlock federal funding for the Sunbucks program so that kids can count on nutritious meals even during the summertime when they're not at school. It's a 25-to-1 federal to state match. That is an incredible return on state investment. And to address the unfunded mandates created by H.R. 1, I'm proposing that we help to keep counties funded by helping them with SNAP. Each of these investments will give our kids a better shot at success. And if we're serious about the success of North Carolina's 1.5 million public school students, we should not be taking money away from them to pay for wealthy parents to send their kids to unaccountable private schools. Over the next decade, if left unchecked, we're going to take $7.5 billion away from our public schools and spend them on private schools with little to no accountability. And for the record, the voucher program is not about expanding choice. Nearly every single student who received a private school voucher for the first time never attended a public school. It's simply taking public dollars to send to families who were already sending their children to a private school, parents who could already afford to send their children to a private school. And by the way, rural North Carolina, we know they don't have the same concentration of private schools as the urban areas. So that means the vouchers can't even be used there. North Carolina's rural families are losing their tax dollars that could go to strengthen their public schools that are instead now going to parents in Wake and Mecklenburg County to send their kids to private schools. Let's get our priorities straight. Let's focus on improving the most important institution in our state, our public schools, not abandon them for private ones. To set our kids up for success when they start school and to help more parents remain in the workforce, my budget also invests in child care and early education. Last year, my bipartisan task force on child care and early education recommended establishing a greater statewide subsidy for child care, which would especially benefit rural counties. Our state has suffered a net loss of 262 child care programs since the state last passed a budget, due in part to inadequate child care subsidies. My budget adopts the task force's recommendation, which will enable our state to better pay early educators and make more slots available for families. It would also raise reimbursement rates for NC Pre-K so that more kids can benefit from that program. Child care is one cost that's weighing heavily on families. Another is the cost of housing. You may remember that I said that 325,000 people have moved here since we last passed a full budget. And you've heard it said before that if you will build it, they will come. Well, it turns out in North Carolina, if you don't build it, they will still come. So my budget invests in building more workforce housing, and it rewards local governments that increase housing supply in their jurisdictions. Whether it's housing and child care, or it's electricity, groceries, and gas, too many families are struggling to make ends meet and cover their monthly expenses. That's why in my budget, I am cutting taxes to put more money into the pockets of North Carolina's working families. My budget proposes 4 tax cuts: a refundable child and dependent care tax cut to help parents afford the cost of child care, a working families tax cut to ensure that low to moderate income workers keep more of what they earn and it could mean up to $800 for certain families each year. A back-to-school sales tax holiday in August to help families afford school supplies while holding local governments harmless on revenue, and a larger standard personal income deduction for every North Carolinian taxpayer. During this time of economic insecurity, my budget also enhances unemployment benefits to support people who lose their job through no fault of their own as they work to find their next job. These investments and these tax cuts are what it looks like to be truly pro-family. Our current tax policy is not. If we go through with the pre-programmed tax breaks that mostly benefit wealthy folks, we will be undermining a critical element of what makes North Carolina so special. So I'm calling on the General Assembly to look closely at the current realities we live in and to hit pause on these outdated pre-programmed tax breaks. And if we don't, we will face an imminent shortfall in our budget of $5 billion, risking massive cuts to critical services, the likes of which we have not experienced in North Carolina since the Great Recession 17 years ago. North Carolina has the 9th lowest state and local tax burden in the country, has the lowest tax on businesses in the country, and is already cutting taxes $1.3 billion this year. To be clear, let's not raise taxes, but let's take a pause on these cuts and maintain the rates exactly where they are. Budgets require choices. And with the choice between investing in our children's education and the health of our kids versus giving money to corporate shareholders, or between cutting taxes for working families and cutting taxes for wealthy out-of-staters, I choose North Carolina's kids, families, and future every time. Next, we must keep building our strong economy by investing in our workforce. Since January 1st, 2025, 15 months, we've announced nearly 41,000 new jobs, nearly $28 billion in capital investment. It's at every corner of the state, and these are good jobs with good wages. Economic development is a team sport, and I tell you, Team North Carolina is the best in the business. We've got to keep at it. We've got to not only grow this economy, but make sure that it works for everybody. We have to invest in people so that they have the knowledge and skills to succeed in what is an ever-changing economy. A 4-year college is great for many people, but it's not right for every person. And someone shouldn't have to have a bachelor's degree to earn an income sufficient to support a family. That's why I propose more support for short-term workforce training programs and apprenticeships to expand pathways available to good-paying jobs. In many ways, our state's community colleges are our secret weapon. Almost all North Carolinians will live within 30 minutes of a community college, and these schools have great relationships with our state's employers. They know what students need to succeed, so we must accelerate their impact. We must commit to Propel NC. It's a new funding formula that prioritizes programs in high-demand, high-wage fields. Propel NC strengthens the alignment between the courses that community colleges offer and the skills that employers need. My budget also proposes providing free community college tuition to students pursuing short-term credentials in high-demand industries. And I am proposing greater funding for apprenticeship programs tailored to our state's needs, including in advanced manufacturing, small businesses, aviation, the public sector, and rural communities. Beyond workforce investment, my budget advances economic growth by supporting loans for small businesses, rural transformation projects, and workforce housing. Our people deserve every opportunity for economic success. They also deserve to be safe and healthy. Everyone wants to live in safety, to go about their daily lives without fear. But several recent high-profile incidents have ended in tragedy. And as we mourn the loss of all of those lives taken by violence, many people feel unsafe in their homes or in their communities. To remedy this, it starts with law enforcement, the people who protect us, and we must recruit and retain the best. When there are too many vacancies, it means that every other law enforcement officer has to carry a bigger load, and it means that they cannot cover as much territory. That's why in my budget, I am calling for raising the pay for all state law enforcement officers, correctional officers, and youth counselors, and offering hiring bonuses to new officers or those coming from out of state to work in state or local law enforcement agencies. My budget also gives law enforcement more tools that they need to succeed, including body cameras and Viper communications equipment. It includes behavioral threat assessments for our schools and more funding for school resource officers. It includes juvenile justice residential crisis unit to serve more young people who are experiencing mental health crises. It includes treatment for opioid use disorder in our correctional facilities so that people who are experiencing addiction can get help before they re-enter our communities. And it includes a fentanyl control unit of law enforcement and prosecutors to investigate and stop the flow of this deadly poison into our state. Too many North Carolinians have lost a loved one to drug overdose or senseless crime, and we honor those victims by confronting these crises head on. Many of these are upstream investments that can prevent crimes from occurring in the first place. My budget includes several behavioral health investments that also make people healthier and all of us safer. I'm calling for the state to start by opening 2 more behavioral health units in our state's psychiatric hospitals, which would open up as many as 48 additional beds. I'm calling for the creation of 50 new co-responder teams in rural counties to give law enforcement more support during responses to people who are experiencing a behavioral health crisis. And I'm calling for a meaningful pay raise for our state's nurses and health technicians. Right now in North Carolina, we have hundreds of empty psychiatric beds in our state hospitals. They're empty because we don't have the staff to serve them. Let's work to fill that gap, get people the health care that they need, and keep all of us safe. And of course, we can't talk about health care without talking about Medicaid. More than 3 million North Carolinians, about a quarter of the entire state, including children, pregnant and postpartum women, people with disabilities, older adults, working families, have Medicaid. My budget ensures that we fully fund Medicaid so that the millions of North Carolinians can stay healthy and the entire healthcare system, which depends on it, can remain strong. The work of this state is so important, and taxpayer dollars are so precious that we cannot afford to waste a penny. We need people to know that their government is working for them. That means continuing to fix the DMV and improving online services across state government. It means identifying areas where we can be more efficient to save taxpayer money, including through the responsible use of AI. It means helping veterans transition successfully to civilian life. It means helping people connect to jobs and opportunity. And it means giving state employees a raise and a deserved bonus so that we can recruit and retain talent that North Carolinians depend on. Our goals are so important for the state. I want so much for North Carolina. Building an economy that works for everyone, strengthening our public schools and workforce, supporting families with the cost of living, keeping families safe and healthy, and maximizing the impact of every single tax dollar. We cannot afford to miss this moment. My budget, it's about opportunity. I believe that if you work hard, where you come from should never limit how far you can go. That is the promise of North Carolina. Delivering on that promise is what drives me as your governor. Delivering on that promise is what this budget is all about. I'm grateful to the General Assembly for its consideration of the budget, and I look forward to working with them in the coming weeks so that we can do right by every single North Carolinian. Thank you. Happy to take questions at this time, and I also have Kristen Walker, the State Budget Director, to help me when Gary asks me too hard a question.
Yes, sir. know this is kind of an open-ended, I'm sorry. Gary Robertson with Associated Press. This is kind of an open-ended question, Governor, but how did we get to this point where the 9th largest state, soon to be 8th largest state in the country, hasn't had a comprehensive budget in almost 3 years and doesn't have a budget particularly right now? I mean, do you cast blame on the legislature solely for this, or how did, for an outsider, somebody who's looking at this from out of state, how did we get to this place?
In many ways, I share everyone's confusion. I've been governor now for 15 months, and last year, typically when there are disputes over budgets and the failure to pass a budget, it's because there's a difference between the governor and the legislature, the executive and the legislative branches. That's particularly true when you have differences in the parties. I'm a Democrat. The legislature is controlled by Republican. What is absolutely unique about what is going on in North Carolina is that both chambers of the General Assembly are controlled by Republicans. They are of the same party, and they nearly have a supermajority in each chamber, but they couldn't agree with each other. So I never had a budget to even react to sign or veto. I think that we are at a point where everyone appreciates that it's been too long. We've added 325,000 people. Every one of those people come to the state and they take advantage of services. They go visit the DMV. There are more cars on the road for the highway patrol to keep safe. There, sadly, are more people in our state prisons. Everything we do as a state increases when there are more people coming to the state. When you have 6 to 8% inflation, it means that all of the leases that state agencies are in that are not in public buildings, those leases have gone up. But there's been no change in state law to reflect any of that. And we are getting close to a breaking point, and I'm very hopeful that both chambers, the House and the Senate, will work together to pass a budget. And I certainly hope it's one that invests in the state's future.
Hi, Dawn Vaughn with the News and Observer. You criticized the private school vouchers, opportunity scholarship spending. Yep. Do you want to cut that a certain amount? And is that part of looking at if these the revenue triggers, and some are met, if those stay, in the coming years? Is that a way to look at cutting some state spending, or are there other things that you'd want to cut to reach that?
Yeah, what I am proposing to do with the voucher program is that, first of all, I was in the General Assembly when this law was first enacted. And the way it was pitched to the entire state was, we are going to come up with a program that helps poor kids who are in public schools that are failing. My view is, let's invest in public schools so that they don't fail, and let's give parents choice within the public school system through magnet schools and other ways of creating choice within the public school system before we abandon it and create a second competing system that requires its own resources. So that's who it was originally targeted for, poor kids who wanted to change. Well, what they do now is over 90% of the kids who got a voucher have never attended a public school. So it's going to kids who are already made the choice to be in a private school, not kids who are unhappy with what their experience was in a public school. I don't propose eliminating the program in its entirety. I propose eliminating it for all new entrants. And if you are a household of 150% of area median income or less, then you can stay in the program as long as your kid is in K-12. So over time, it will wind down. You look at South Carolina spending the equivalent of $8 billion more a year on public education. These other states see what we've got in North Carolina, and they want it, and they are hungry, and they are on their toes. And if we don't stay on our toes, they're going to eat our lunch. They're not going to eat our lunch next year, not even in 2 or 3 years. But where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 10 years? And that's what I want, is I want my children to make their future here in North Carolina, and I want their children to have every opportunity to succeed just as we are enjoying this lovely state.
If I can add a quick follow-up on the Medicaid deal, seems to be the most optimistic issue that
Yeah.
there's compromise on. Where do you see that standing, and the needs there if that's reached this session?
I have too heard that there seems to be progress on reaching an agreement on fully funding Medicaid, and I hope it happens immediately. It needs to happen immediately. So let's do that, and then let's work together to do what we can as a state to try to keep healthcare costs down. I mean, there's a real problem with healthcare inflation. We're a high-cost healthcare state, separate from Medicaid, just in terms of what each of us pays, no matter what your payer, your insurer is. We're an expensive healthcare state, so we have to tackle this issue of healthcare inflation, doing what they call bending the cost curve so it doesn't rise so fast and starts to rise slower. And obviously, we would love it if it just stayed stable year to year. So we've got a lot of work to do on healthcare, and I'm eager to partner with the General Assembly to tackle that issue.
Adam Wagner from WNC. With the 4 tax cuts that you're proposing, could you, again, sort of walk through the difference in thinking there versus the more sweeping tax cuts that the General Assembly wants?
What I feel like we should do is take a moment to recognize how people are struggling financially. And there are a lot of households that at the end of the month, they are figuring out what bill can I pay and what bill can I push off to the next month. And if we can help them by putting some more money in their pocket, it'll help them buy groceries, buy gas, buy their medicine, whatever it is their monthly expenses are. So the working families tax cut rewards people who are in the workforce but aren't earning very much money. And that is a critical piece of the program. It helps people who really need it. The child care and dependent tax credit, that does 2 things. One is it helps families deal with the high cost of child care, but it also puts more money in the child care system so that it makes it a better business proposition for child care operators, because we've lost 262 child care operators in the last 2.5 years. We need more of them to come back. The sales tax for going back to school, it's just about helping parents. I mean, parents, every August, they have to go buy all their kids' school supply, and that's a real crunch, and we recognize that, and we want to make that experience a little less painful for North Carolina families. And then the standard deduction, increasing that helps everybody so that everybody gets some value. The challenge with what the tax triggers are is that North Carolina, again, one thing about having been in this business for a while, I remember what the debates were when we first started talking about lowering the corporate income tax. Corporate income tax in North Carolina about 15 years ago was 6 3/4. It was the highest in the entire Southeast. And what every legislator said who was championing lowering those taxes were, we are not competitive. We stick out like a sore thumb. And they said, we don't have to be the lowest, we just cannot be the highest. Well, now we are literally the lowest state that has a corporate income tax in the nation, 2%. And when you look at all taxes on businesses, we have the lowest incidence of business taxes in America. So we've already won. If your objective was to be the most competitive, we are number 1. So why are we going from 2% corporate income tax to 0%, which is what their budget proposes? Who benefits when we cut corporate income taxes? It's the shareholders, most of whom do not live in North Carolina. And honestly, it's the corporate executives. They get about 10% of the value of that tax cut, who are extremely wealthy people. Again, most of them don't even live in North Carolina. So we're talking about taking $2 billion of revenue off the bottom line that could go to help our public school kids. To me, the choice between a wealthy out-of-stater and a North Carolina elementary school student, it's not even a choice. And that's what I want the legislature to focus on. Let's make tax investments that help families and not that help big corporations.
And then jumping back real quick to the Medicaid issue, we've seen the House Speaker call for some reforms to Medicaid. Do you think the program needs reforms, or are you, again, kind of more focused on the cost side?
It's reforms to lower costs. Yes, we absolutely need to do everything we can to keep Medicaid costs as low as we possibly can. Understanding that people need health care. And one reason why healthcare costs are going up is that every year there's some new incredible discovery or development of a drug that really improves people's lives. And so it's a challenge, because the more advancement there is, the more we want people to take advantage of it. And it enhances and extends people's lives, but it also costs money. And so we've got to figure out, how do we keep costs low without sacrificing people's health? And it's a challenge. And I look forward to working with the legislature on that issue.
Thank you. Michael Perchik, ABC 11. Can you share some more specifics about the housing investments and that private-public partnership that you're looking into to try and increase housing stock at this juncture?
Yeah, there are two ways that we can help produce more housing. One is through existing programs. We have the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, NCHFA, and what they do is administer programs to incentivize developers of low-income housing. They mainly work with federal funding programs, but they also have state funding, and I'm developing a workforce housing program that they would administer that would help developers who build these workforce housing units that are intended for people who work in their community to be able to live in their community. What's so frustrating is that we have police officers, firefighters, and teachers who work in Raleigh or work in Greensboro or work in Charlotte or work in Asheville. They cannot even live in the communities that they're serving, and that's just wrong. The other thing is fundamentally the way we solve the housing problem is by producing more housing. It is a clear example of the law of supply and demand in economics, that when you have the exact same number of units and you have 325,000 people move into a state, you have more people bidding on the same units, it's going to drive up the price. So what we as a state have to do is adopt policies that will produce more housing, which will serve to increase supply and lower costs on everyone. And there are some policy ideas that those don't even need budget changes. Those are just changes in law that the state can adopt that would yield more units and therefore lower costs for all of us. And again, I want to work with the legislature to do that, because housing is such a bear of an expense for most people's monthly bills.
Has there been any discussion about incentives for developers? Because to build a unit, it typically makes more sense to build a luxury unit than a luxury unit.
That's exactly what the first example I talked about, the workforce housing through the Housing Finance Agency. It's to incentivize a developer to build a unit targeted to people of a certain income who tend to be working families, not well-to-do families, so that they'll build that unit on that property instead of a much fancier or more expensive unit. And then I have money in the budget to reward local governments that change their ordinances that restrict construction. I want to incentivize these local governments to look out for people who need to be able to afford to live in their communities.
Christine Zhu with NC Newsline. You mentioned including AI into the government to help maximize efficiency. What would that look like? What services would be affected?
Well, I created an AI working group last year, an AI leadership council, and then we have an AI accelerator within state government. And so we're engaging with every state agency, and they are coming up with use cases. Each agency had to identify 3 to 5 use cases that they could use AI to enhance their efficiency. And just some examples, at the DMV, they now use AI to do license plate readers so that they can save staff time that would otherwise be used looking at lists to now be able to serve customers. The Employment Security Commission has an AI chat box so that when people have questions about services that the Employment Security Commission provides, they can get help and actually started on their application process. I just learned yesterday about DOT that there's an AI program that they're using at all work sites where they can just scan the work site with their iPad and it can go and help identify areas that might pose safety risks to workers. Sort of the way a radiologist can look at a scan across the world, somebody can look at this workplace site and identify where risks may pose. So those are just a few use cases, and we want to use technology to help us increase our efficiency and lower costs for taxpayers.
What's the impact of that on the environment with data centers and using up water and energy costs?
Well, obviously AI depends on data centers, but the data centers can be anywhere. They don't have to be here. And I am very much concerned about the impact of data centers, particularly on people's electricity rates. I've asked the Energy Policy Task Force that I put together to look at the cost of data centers on rates so that whatever rates, whatever impact they're having on the generation of energy or the transmission of energy or the distribution of energy, they bear that cost. They should bear it. They have so much capital. This is where all global capital is in these big AI companies. They should pay that. We, as regular old residential ratepayers, shouldn't be subsidizing them. And in fact, as a state, we are currently subsidizing data centers to come here with economic development incentives. They actually get a rebate on how much electricity they consume, which is almost incentivizing them to consume more electricity to create more demand on the system, which raises the rates on everybody else. And so I am calling on the legislature to re-examine those incentives to make sure that they are structured in a way that makes sense for the people of North Carolina.
Thank you. Caroline Yaffa with WRAL. Are you involved in discussions with Senate Leader Phil Berger and Speaker Destin Hall? And have you had any recent discussions with them? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I've talked with both of them in the last week, and we check in periodically, and they give me updates. I tell them my thoughts on how I think things should be structured. They say what they're thinking on different issues, and we have discussions just the way we're supposed to. And that's why I am hopeful. I am hopeful that we will have a budget. I genuinely believe that both chambers want a budget, and now the proof will be in the pudding.
Do you feel like from those recent conversations that they've given you those signs of that you're feeling hopeful?
Yes, both chambers are very clear that they want to do everything they can to achieve a budget. There remain issues of dispute between them, but they know clearly what they are, and I think they're figuring out what are ways that we can try to address the concerns of the other chamber while remaining true to whatever principled position they have to get to a compromise. That's what this entire exercise is about. It's about compromise. That's what our system is based on, and what it takes is for people to be creative and strategic.
Hi, Ashley Freedy with NC Health News. In the budget, there's a proposed 48 additional psychiatric beds, I believe. As you mentioned, currently the beds that we have available aren't open because of staffing shortages. Could you talk a little bit about that and whether you think the investments regarding healthcare workers are going to be enough to fill those beds, not only in those facilities, but we're seeing in, long-term care facilities, inspection rates, et cetera.
Yeah. What the budget calls for is a 15% increase for state nurses and nursing assistants, 10% in the first year and 5% in the second year. And that's to help us start the long, hard march of making these jobs competitive to what they could earn in the private sector, so that we can avoid this issue of empty psychiatric beds. About a third of all of our psychiatric beds currently are unused because we don't have the staff for them. So that's the long-term strategy. Make this job more competitive, do everything we can to recruit talent into the state to serve those folks who need the care. But we also recognize that there are needs today. And so I have a separate proposal which would open up 48 beds by essentially surging assets to DHHS so they could hire contract people to serve people who are in those beds. Because it could be, people are on waiting lists for weeks to get the mental health care that they need. And in those weeks, terrible things can happen. They can hurt themselves, they can hurt other people. So we don't have time to waste.
Hey, Governor, first, I'm just curious why there's no funding in the budget to investigate the Carolina Hurricanes non-goal last night.
It's the refs. We need to investigate the refs.
But on a serious note, 10 days from now, there's going to be protests from the Association of Educators. I know you share these educators' frustration over the lack of pay. Is this the right way about going about it, given some of these districts will have no classes and parents struggling to figure out what to do during the day?
Yeah, look, I want every kid to be in a classroom learning every day. And the way we do that is by making teaching the attractive profession that we all want it to be. Teachers, I've spent a lot of time in our schools, and I tell you, every time I come out of that school, I'm on a bit of a high because there's so much positive energy happening in North Carolina's public schools. The teachers are giving their all to these kids. The kids are absolutely adorable. It's just a wonderful experience. And I encourage everybody out there that if you have not volunteered in a K-12 school in a while, go sign up through your county school system and spend some time in your school, and you too will come back affirmed in your belief of the possibility of public education. So what I want is to pay teachers what they deserve and to make this competitive. The fact that we have lower starting teacher pay than every state that borders us, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, again, as somebody who grew up in North Carolina and understood the way that this state government has prioritized public education, this is an embarrassment. And it is absolutely unacceptable. I know friends of ours whose kids graduated from Appalachian State wanted to teach in North Carolina as teaching in South Carolina because they pay so much more. We're losing out on talent, and it should not be that way. So why don't we just pay our teachers a salary that they deserve, and then we won't ever have to worry about any of this. They will be in the classrooms doing exactly what we want them to do.
And I guess just broadly looking at the budget, you're calling for starting teacher pay to go up by $12,000. House Republicans want it to go up to $50,000. Senate Republicans put it at like $510. So there's a difference of like 1 to 3% versus 20+%. How do you possibly bridge such a sizable gap there?
Through patience. Patience and persuasion.
Governor Will Michaels with NC Local. Another question about public education. With the mechanism for Leandro being invalidated earlier this month, how much was that on your mind writing this proposal? And then I guess how do you pay for that extra funding for public education? Is it simply by pausing the tax cuts?
Yeah. We need to invest a lot more in K-12, and we will have more revenue to do that if we don't give our scarce taxpayer dollars away to folks who are wealthy and who live out of state. That's the choice, the fundamental choice. And I want to make sure that we are not hurting our state, the most important institution we have in the state, which are our K-12 schools. And when you look at where we are today, and I'm not satisfied with where we are today, but just take where we are today. And then over the next 3 years, you take into account how many new people move into North Carolina and what the inflation rate is expected to be, and you just take where we are today to where we would be in 3 years. If these tax triggers go through, we are going to have $5 billion less to invest on all critical services, public safety, healthcare, public education. Imagine how painful a budget writing experience that's going to be if 3 years from now I come back to you and roll out a budget and we have $5 billion less, that we have to institute cuts to that magnitude, cuts that we have not seen since the Great Recession. And the difference between 2009 and today is that we were in a worldwide recession in 2009. This is entirely self-inflicted. Makes no sense.
Next question will come from online, Taylor Thompson with WLOS. How does the previous third proposed Helene budget connect to the entire recommended budget?
How does the proposed Helene budget connect to what?
How does the previous third proposed Helene budget connect to the entire recommended budget?
This budget, okay, thank you. They are on parallel tracks. I recently proposed a Helene 3 budget. It's the third budget I've proposed to help the recovery of Western North Carolina, $792 million, and it's paid entirely from reserve accounts. So this budget that I'm proposing today comes from general fund receipts. So they're both expenditures and investments by the state, but they come from different sources, and so they don't conflict with each other.
Hi, Mary Helen from Axios. I wanted to clarify, are you still hopeful that a 2025-26 budget is coming, one that will be backdated to last summer, or are we moving on from that?
Well, that's one reason why I put forward the critical needs budget. That there are certain things that need to have been, have to get paid this fiscal year. So I think what will happen, although I'm not certain, is that they will do a 26-27 budget that just builds in the expenses from the previous year.
Okay, thank you.
But if you find that out from the legislature, let me know. Thank you. All right, thank you all so much.